Ladbroke Grove I think it's fundamental to the history of this country, whether the country likes it or not.
For me, round here was like the first melting pot because of the music and the blues dances.
There's a sense of freedom in this area, a sense of life, a sense of belonging. What more do you need?
My name's Diane Burstein, I'm a London Blue Badge guide. The tour that we're going to be doing today is a tour of Notting Hill, concentrating on the history and also the multicultural nature of Notting Hill, looking at all the different groups of people who've come to live here over the years.
My name is Colin Prescott. I have lived in Ladbroke Grove, North Kensington, since 1958, in the very same house. I still live in the house that my mother brought me to in 58. I'm 63 years old now. I first came to Ladbroke Grove when I was 13 from the Caribbean.
I first came to live in Ladbroke Grove in 1971, and at that point in this area, the area was predominantly occupied by Irish people and people from the Caribbean.
Well, I've been living in West 9 for 43 years, and over the years, I've also seen many changes.
I'm living in Notting Hill Gate, part of London, and I really like this area because there are very many different communities here and different flavours of different people.
For a long time, it's been a diverse community place. Before the, quotes, black-skinned people arrived, there were Irish people here, there were Poles here, there were people who might have been called of Jewish extraction here. The new black populations that began to settle here in the 1950s came here because it was already a place where it was known that in-migrants, people arriving in the city and trying to find cheap places to settle for the first time, would go there.
In 1948, you had the famous ship, the Empire Windrush, that arrived in Britain from Jamaica.
I was born here. My parents have been here from the 40s. They were here as part of the war, end of the war effort. Second World War, that is.
And they found that when they were wearing an army uniform or an Air Force uniform, that people had treated them with respect. But unfortunately, they found that when they returned here, they weren't treated with quite the same respect. In fact, they were treated with quite a lot of hostility.
My dad was a bus driver and my mother was a nurse, and of course many of the new people from the Caribbean at that time went to work in transport and in the health services. We needed people to come drive our buses, our trains, to work in our hospitals. The country was short of people, and of course what lots of people didn't know is that the people from the Caribbean not only had British citizenship, but also were invited to come here to help to build the country up after the war. And that's something a lot of people didn't know at the time. Papers didn't talk about those kind of things, and education didn't educate children to understand them.
I came to England seeking work. I'm a plumber by trade. Life wasn't very easy. The Teddy Boys era, one had to be always on the lookout because they always out to create trouble for the immigrants, people like me.
I remembered when I came here, 1965, the age of 17, my first recollection was my father asked me the following morning, "Son, would you please go across the road to the newspaper shop? When I went to the paper shop and I saw some adverts in the window, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. When I went in and I told my father, he said, son, that's the way it is in England.
When Irish people first came to this country, and we mainly built all the roads here, of course, it was a case with landlords when they were looking to rent properties to live in, a room, a bedsit, whatever, small or grotty, because they were very grotty. I think it was the same thing. There were notices up everywhere. No Irish, no blacks, no dogs. It was an appalling way to treat people.
If I let you come in, all my boys would leave.
If you let me come in?
If I let you come in, all the other ones would go.
Yes. Okay,
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Where did these racial tensions come from? How did they arise? And you have to look into the big history, the deep history of Britain to understand that racism is part and parcel of how Britain made empire. The ruling classes of Great Britain had sown racism into the working classes in this country to make them feel they were superior to other people had to serve them. So when they arrived here, amongst other people, the people who were brought up thinking that they were white thought that it was okay to be prejudiced against people who looked black.
It was difficult to find accommodation in the first place because lots of the adverts, they would say that no blacks. There are times when you'll be called names, but sometimes there are people that would react, others would just ignore it. Like
one of the landlords who was willing to rent out apartments and properties to people was a man who was known as Peter Rackman.
Well, from what my mum told me, because my mum was actually a tenant of his, he was an unscrupulous, low-life, shady landlord.
In a way, Peter Rackman's got a very bad rep, and he carries it for a lot of other people, because there were many bad landlords in the area.
He'd find people that were homeless or they was overcrowded and tell them, I've got rooms for you to rent. And then when they'd come and view the room, he'd let them rent the room for a certain amount of money one week. Then the next week he'd double the money, or he'd bring someone else in overnight and say he's sharing the room with you.
If you didn't pay, and mostly it was black people in those days, if you didn't pay, he used to say, he begged men to get you out or put dogs on you and all of that he used to do. Yeah, he used to run around here a lot, because we called them crooks.
Whenever he wanted to change the people in a house, he would get very heavy with people. Yes, he would send heavies in and so on.
And organisations that we have today in Notting Hill, like the Notting Hill Housing Trust, started off as a reaction against bad landlords like Rackman. Now, back in 1958, you had Oswald Mosley. He decided that he would try and establish himself here in Notting Hill. He did whip up unrest, and 1958 was the year of the Notting Hill riots.
The cause of race riot was because one section of the community that couldn't accept, they didn't want to accept that. So they created a lot of problems for the people from outside.
Well, they have no choice but to mix. They started it. They went to Africa and took our foreparents and put them into slavery.
You had the Teddy Boys, who were the white boys who used to dress up in Edwardian-style jackets. They would come down looking for trouble with the local young black people, starting fights, attacking people's homes and businesses.
There were lynch mobs. A lynch mob isn't a mob that hangs people. A lynch mob is a mob of people that attacks people for no reason on the street.
The black man eventually said enough was enough. So what do we do about it? We tried the peaceful way. That didn't work. We had to do something about it.
The riots stopped, or those lynchings stopped, because the settling working class Caribbean people, after a while, said, no more of this. So they organized and they came out on the street and they began to fight back. At that point, the police thought, lots of trouble here, and they moved in and they moved everybody off the street. In 1959, there was a murder. There was a murder in Ladbroke Grove of a man called Kelso Cochrane by a group of young white men who attacked him. To this day, nobody has been arrested or prosecuted in the courts. And Claudia Jones was the person who organized a march, protests to Parliament, and actually started the spirit of the thing we now call the Carnival in London, indoors, in order to heal the rifts in community that she saw as happening.
Claudia Jones is one of the biggest people in local history, one of the most important people.
A lot of people talk about Claudia Jones because we know it's a big name now. I don't know if you've seen it, but she's on a stamp. So she's moved from being a real marginal person nobody knew about. She's so well known now that she's on a British stamp, Claudia Jones.
She actually had quite a lot of organisational skills, and I think she did a lot of work in pulling the West Indian community together.
She founded the West Indian Gazette and used it as a tool for organising people, for bringing people together.
And she was the influence behind introducing Carnival as an example of the way people could celebrate their existence without having to fight to be recognised.
My first experience of the carnival was like, wow, I've been reborn. The colours, the dances. I got behind the float and I swear to God, even if I didn't want to dance, I couldn't stop myself. My feet were just going patter, 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 patter. Beautiful. Couldn't stop. I was converted.
Carnival years ago was much better than it was today.
I remember one of the very first one. I was coming from Kilburn on a 28 bus down Great Western Road, and the bus had to stop. And we were upstairs and we looked through the front window, and there was one van with about 6 people behind it going like this, holding up the road.
I was lucky enough to see one of the very early carnivals, I'm thinking about 1972, which at that point was so small. You just suddenly heard steel bands playing and 2 or 3 lorries going down the road and people going after the lorries to see what was going on.
It was more for the people. You didn't have to pay to have a stall outside your house and sell your own food.
Unfortunately, it developed into what it is today, seen by many. And I definitely agree with that. It has a more business-like stamp all over it. We need to have the carnival because it's a way of letting out excess energy.
It's lovely to see the mixed nature of some of the steel bands. You know, when you see black and white people playing steel pan together, you know big things are happening.
I first attended it back in 75. It was a community carnival.
76, I was on Basing Street outside Island Records. We were doing a little gig, and then somebody said, riot, said fight, start down on Acklam Road. So Basing Street's back there, Acklam Road's there. But the ripple, word of mouth. So we said, Chester, get the van, and we start pack up all the gear. Because we don't know if he's going to use our stuff as missile. And we just pack up all the gear. It's the famous footage of where you see the kid hitting the police car.
Born and grow in England, look for my days I get raised in England. Just so I learn to go sing song, learn to beat bad boy with them in England. Nothing I go on in England, Babylon police are swarm in England. Gunshot a beat in England, bully them a scrape on the street in England. Love yard man come to England, come to look a better life in England.
Having that kind of action on the streets of your area, it's extreme. It's a very extreme reaction to something. It doesn't come every day. It only comes because something in society is wrong.
Attacks, riots have positive effects only where people resist.
All fight the power in England and stop fight one another in England.
And that's one of the things this community always had. When people attempted to put them into situations of disadvantage and victimage, they resisted. The positive comes when people resist injustice. Yeah? When people stand up for their rights. That's the positive.
After the riots, the carnival riots, it was all right. It was a good thing in the end.
So what was your first experience of carnival life?
I was scared of it. It was a bit, violent.
The first time I ever ventured into the carnival was 1981. My girlfriend at the time, she was the carnival queen. And she usually tells me off. Oh, every year you give me all this amount of money to go and buy costumes, and you never once come and see me. So I decided at carnival, I would go and see her costumes and take some photographs of her. And it was one of my biggest mistakes. Because when I got to Ladbroke Grove Station, everything was standstill. And when the crowd started moving, if you drop your keys, your money, whatsoever, forget about it, mate, because you'll get trampled over. And I made up my mind, I would never, ever venture into the carnival again.
I think it's absolutely wonderful way to get people together where they can eat, dance in the streets. I mean, it's brilliant seeing the police dancing in the streets.
Carnival is just for the colours, just people from everywhere just come together and they have fun, they dance. Some people get a bit freaked out by the crowd, but as long as you're aware that there are that many people and you kind of realise that and you're with friends, then it's the best. I love it.